She told everyone at the dinner table that I lacked passion. They laughed, and then I showed them exactly what passion looks like when a man finally stops pretending. Before I start, if you like stories with twists, betrayal, and cold-blooded comebacks, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you think I should have done next. That I remember that Thursday night like it was etched into steel. The house smelled like roasted chicken, the lights were dimmed, and for a moment I thought my wife, Michelle, had simply planned a quiet dinner with her sister and her husband. Nothing unusual. After 30 years together, small gatherings had become routine for us. Comfortable, predictable. I walked in through the back door carrying a folder of work papers, a little tired, a little numb from the day, expecting the usual warmth. Michelle greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't think much of it, not at first. The table was already set, candles flickering, plates arranged neatly. Her sister, Karen, and Karen's husband, Paul, sat waiting with wine glasses half full. I hung my jacket on the chair, loosened my collar, and tried to shake off the knot in my chest that had become a permanent guest lately. That we talked about the weather, about the neighbor's new truck, small, empty things. I tried to ease into the evening, even though Michelle kept giving me these short, sharp glances, like she was checking whether I'd catch some invisible cue. Eventually, after the plates were cleared and dessert was served, Karen said something harmless about relationships needing excitement. And that was Michelle's opening. She put down her fork, looked right at me, even smiled, and said, "Well, excitement is something Ethan has never exactly been overflowing with." The air snapped. Karen gave an awkward laugh. Paul looked down at his plate like he'd suddenly discovered gold veins in the porcelain. And I just sat there, hands folded, pretending it didn't feel like she'd thrown a match into a dry field. Michelle didn't stop. "In fact," she continued, swirling her wine, "I've been thinking lately that maybe I deserve a different kind of experience. Something he can't offer." She said it lightly, like a joke, but it wasn't a joke. Her eyes never left mine. Karen's smile died. Paul cleared his throat. No one knew what to say. That I didn't argue. I didn't crack a joke. I didn't even blink. I just held her gaze and let the silence thicken until she shifted in her chair. The thing about silence is, most people fear it. They fill it, spill words, panic. I let it sit there between us, heavy and electric. She tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, Ethan, don't look so serious." But I knew that tone, that edge. I'd heard it in snippets of late-night phone calls she thought I didn't notice. In text messages she hid the moment I entered a room. I knew she wasn't joking. She was testing how far she could push me. I simply nodded, excused myself from the table, and stood to refill my water. Nobody spoke. Even the old clock above the mantel seemed afraid to tick. When I returned to the table, Michelle suddenly changed the subject, chattering about some charity event. She acted as if nothing had just happened, but the shift was too sharp, too deliberate. Karen kept glancing at me. I could tell she felt the tension vibrating off me like heat from asphalt. Paul focused on cutting his slice of pie into microscopic pieces. Michelle just kept smiling, the kind of smile a gambler gives when she's already decided she's all in. Inside, something in me hardened. Not from anger. Anger is loud, clumsy. This was cold, focused. A quiet that settled deep and solid, like a stone dropped to the bottom of a lake. When the plates were cleared and our guests finally left, Michelle brushed past me on her way to the living room. "You were awfully quiet tonight," she said. "Makes people think you're upset." I stepped closer, close enough that she lifted her chin the way she always did when she felt challenged. "Michelle," I said softly, "people think a lot of things." She blinked, waiting for more, but I didn't give it to her. I walked past her, went into my office, locked the door, and sat down in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat slow to a steady, calculating rhythm. She had crossed a line at that table, publicly, deliberately, and something inside me shifted with it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. but I started thinking, really thinking. And the thing about a quiet man is nobody notices when he starts preparing. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt different, like the walls themselves were listening. Michelle moved around quietly in the kitchen, humming some upbeat tune that didn't match the heaviness between us. I stood in the hallway for a moment watching her through the doorway. She was smiling at her phone, tapping her fingers on the counter in a rhythm I'd never seen from her before. That smile wasn't for me. I walked in, poured coffee without saying a word, and she looked up with that bright, too easy cheerfulness people use when they're hiding something. "You're up early," she said. I nodded and sat at the table. She kept tapping her phone until I cleared my throat. Then she put it down, not face up, the way she always used to, but face down. That small gesture hit me harder than her comment at the dinner table. It confirmed everything I'd been suspecting for months, pressed neatly into one careless, thoughtless movement. I drank my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness settle inside me. She tried making small talk about errands and groceries, but the words bounced off me like pebbles against a brick wall. When she finally left for work, practically floating out the door, I stood in the living room and stared at the empty space she'd left behind. Then I grabbed my keys. I didn't go to work. I drove across town to a quiet strip mall, parked in front of a small electronics shop, and walked in without hesitation. I bought 2 tiny voice recorders, the kind you could hide anywhere. Not because I wanted evidence for court or some grand scheme. Not yet, anyway. I just needed to know the truth. I needed to hear it from her lips, in her words, in her voice. On the way home, I stopped at a hardware store and bought a lock for my office door, something sturdy, something she wouldn't question but wouldn't be able to bypass. When I got home, I installed one recorder underneath the living room shelf where Michelle always took her late-night calls, the one she thought I couldn't hear. The second I hid behind a row of books in the office shelf she never touched. After that, I sat down at my desk and stared at the blank notepad in front of me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was something colder, calmer, sharper. Every time I remembered her smiling while she humiliated me in front of her sister, that coldness hardened. Around lunchtime, she texted me a photo of a salad from some cafe downtown, something she never used to do. It felt like she was performing normality, trying to keep me in place, keep me predictable. I responded with one word: nice. She called me a few minutes later. I let it ring. That afternoon, I started thinking about the last time she had touched me with any trace of affection. I couldn't remember. That should have been the first warning sign, but I had ignored it, chalked it up to age, routine, the slow erosion of habit. Now I realized it had been distance, careful and deliberate. I opened her laptop in the living room, the one she always kept closed but never password protected, at least not until recently. This time, when I lifted the lid, a new password prompt appeared. That was all I needed to see. She never used passwords. Not for 30 years. I shut it gently and sat back. She was slipping. People get bold when they think they've already won. And Michelle, judging from that smug smile last night, thought she had. I spent the rest of the afternoon moving quietly through the house, paying attention to details I had ignored for years. The faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers, the new blouse shoved too deep into the closet, the overnight bag she kept behind the coats. Clues everywhere, scattered like breadcrumbs. By the time she came home, I was sitting on the couch, the TV playing but on mute, my hands folded in my lap. She walked in like she was floating on air again, kissed me lightly on the cheek. A gesture so empty it may as well have been a handshake, and said she had a long day. I nodded. She went upstairs to take a shower, humming the same cheerful tune as that morning. And while the water ran, while steam crept from under the door, I slipped into the walk-in closet and checked the pockets of her jacket. A receipt. A dinner for 2 at a restaurant we'd once called our place. She hadn't invited me there in 5 years. I put the receipt back exactly where I found it, closed the closet door quietly, and walked downstairs. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation is loud, messy, emotional. But me? I wasn't interested in noise. I was interested in clarity, in certainty. And for the first time in years, I felt completely, painfully awake. When she came downstairs afterward, hair wrapped in a towel, asking if I wanted to watch a movie, I smiled at her like nothing was wrong. Because she didn't know that somewhere in this house, a recorder was already waiting. And tomorrow, another one would join it. And the day after that, maybe something else. I didn't need revenge. Not yet. I just needed the truth. And I was going to get it in absolute silence. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because my mind was too clear, too focused. Michelle was still asleep beside me, breathing evenly, her hair spread across the pillow as if nothing in her world was out of place. I lay there for a few minutes, watching her, trying to reconcile the woman I'd spent most of my life with and the woman who now guarded her phone like a secret weapon. Around 6, she stirred, stretched, and reached for her phone before she even acknowledged me. That was new. She glanced at the screen, smiled faintly, then placed it under her pillow as if hiding it from the morning light. She kissed me on the cheek and said she needed to get to the office early. I nodded and watched her move through her routine like a dancer performing choreography she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Except now I could see the missteps, the hesitations, the barely there nerves every time her phone buzzed. When she finally left the house, I stood in the doorway and watched her car pull out of the driveway. She didn't look back. I locked the door, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out the notepad I'd started yesterday. For the first time in my life, I was documenting my own marriage. Times, dates, odd behaviors, financial discrepancies. I wasn't planning for anything yet, but I knew this wasn't going to be simple. Michelle wasn't reckless. She was careful, strategic. Whatever she was doing, she thought she was smarter than me. That was always her biggest flaw. I spent the morning searching for anything that felt out of place. A second perfume bottle beneath the sink. A receipt from a gas station 2 towns over. A note tucked in her coat pocket with a time and a location, but no name. Small pieces, but pieces nonetheless. By noon, I caught myself looking out the window, waiting for her car, even though I knew she wouldn't be home until evening. Habit is strange like that. It lingers long after trust disappears. The first recorder I planted had captured nothing but the TV and a few creaks in the floorboards while I slept, so I moved the second recorder to under the nightstand drawer on her side of the bed. Michelle had started waking up earlier than usual, and I had a feeling she wasn't doing morning yoga like she claimed. I wasn't planning to eavesdrop forever. I wasn't even sure what I'd do with what I found. But I needed something solid, something undeniable. That's what the silence was for. Silence invites truth. In the afternoon, I drove to the cafe where she had taken the photo of her lunch yesterday. I didn't have a plan. I just sat in my car across the street, watching people come and go, wondering if she'd ever sat here with me the way she seemed to sit so easily with someone else. I eventually went inside, ordered a coffee, and looked around for anything familiar. There was nothing, just strangers, each carrying their own secrets. At home, the recorder near the bookshelf had captured something faint the night before, a soft vibration, Michelle whispering something barely audible while standing near the living room window. I replayed it 5 times, turning up the volume until her voice finally surfaced. 3 words. Not full sentences, not names. Just 3 quiet, careful words. I miss you. She hadn't said that to me in years. Hearing her say it to someone else felt like a punch. Not painful, just numbing, like a part of me finally shut down for good. I didn't replay it again. I didn't need to. That evening, Michelle walked through the door with a paper bag from the grocery store and a smile too bright for the day she claimed to have had. She kissed me on the cheek again, a small gesture so forced it felt like she'd practiced it in the car. We ate dinner together, roasted vegetables, fish seasoned just the way she liked it. She talked about meetings, about office politics, about someone named Emily who kept messing up the copier. I nodded and made small comments, careful not to break the rhythm she thought she was controlling. After dinner, she said she needed an early night. She touched my shoulder lightly, like she was trying to reassure me without actually connecting. I watched her walk upstairs, the soft thud of her footsteps echoing down the hall. 5 minutes later, I heard her phone vibrate again. She didn't come back down. I sat in the dark living room and waited, listening to the faint click of her bedroom door closing. I didn't follow. I didn't confront her. Instead, I waited until the house was still and quiet again. Then I walked upstairs, opened my office door, closed it behind me, and sat down with my notepad. I wrote the 3 words I had heard on the recorder, wrote them slowly, pressed the pen hard enough to nearly tear the paper, and then I underlined them. Not because they hurt, but because they were clear, clearer than anything she'd said to me in months. I didn't know where this was headed, not yet. I didn't know what I would do, or when, or how. But I knew one thing with perfect certainty. Michelle wasn't just drifting away. She was already gone, and I was finally ready to stop pretending otherwise. The next day began with an eerie calm, the kind that settles right before a storm that no one else can see. Michelle moved around the kitchen with the same bright efficiency she'd been performing all week, humming, opening cabinets, pretending nothing inside her world was shifting. I sat at the table sipping lukewarm coffee, watching her without watching her, letting my eyes skim over every detail. The way she checked her phone between each chore, the way she bit her lip when a message came through, the way she forced a smile before glancing toward the hallway to make sure I wasn't following. She thought she was subtle. She wasn't. When she finally left for work, I waited exactly 30 seconds before walking to the front window. Her car didn't turn toward her office. It turned toward the highway, a direction she had no reason to go on a Wednesday morning. I didn't follow. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't need to. The recorder under her nightstand had picked up something else last night, something more telling than all the whispers before, the sound of her packing. A zipper, a drawer opening, a faint rustle of fabric. Not enough for a trip, but enough for a meeting. Enough for planning. And planning is always the loudest part of a secret. I spent the morning rearranging things in the house, not to snoop, but to observe. Her purse was lighter than usual. Her keys were on the wrong hook. Her planner had 2 pages torn out, jagged at the edge, the way she always tore something when she didn't want to leave traces. I went into the garage and found her old gardening gloves on the floor, tossed aside like she'd been distracted mid-task. Michelle wasn't careless. Not naturally. Carelessness meant panic. That alone told me more than any recorder could. Around noon, I drove to the bank, not our main branch, but the small one we'd opened years ago for emergencies. She'd forgotten I still had access. I asked for a printout of the recent activity, and the clerk handed it over with a polite smile. One expense caught my eye instantly, a charge for a boutique hotel across town. A place known for privacy, for discretion, for rooms rented by people who didn't want to be seen. The date was yesterday. I folded the printout, slipped it into my jacket, and walked out without a word. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel shock. Just an odd clarity, like someone had finally wiped the fog from a mirror. Back home, the house felt too full and too empty at the same time. I sat in the living room, listening to the clock tick, thinking about every moment I had ignored over the past year. The sudden gym membership, the new clothes, the late meetings that didn't match the calendar on her office wall. I replayed conversations in my mind, the way she'd shifted blame onto me, the way she'd made subtle jokes at family gatherings, the way she'd laughed too hard at things that weren't funny, as if distracting herself from a truth she didn't want me to see. In the afternoon, I decided to test something. Not her loyalty, but her expectations. I texted her, thinking about cooking something special tonight. It was vague enough to be harmless, yet personal enough to force a reaction. She responded within minutes. Sounds good. I might be a little late, big project today. Another lie, smooth and practiced. I put the phone down and walked into our bedroom. I didn't touch her things this time. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the quiet. The silence felt different now, no longer a void, but a space filling with answers I hadn't even asked for yet. Around 5, the recorder in the living room captured the sound of the front door opening. Michelle stepped inside, greeting the house with a cheerful tone that cracked slightly on the edges. I remained seated on the couch as she approached, her heels tapping a rhythm against the hardwood floor. "Hey," she said, dropping her keys in the dish. "Long day. I'm starving." She leaned in to kiss me, but I angled my face just enough for her lips to graze my cheek instead. A flicker of confusion crossed her expression. "Everything okay?" she asked lightly. "Perfect," I said. She forced a smile, though her eyes darted toward her purse on the counter, the one she'd kept zipped tight all week. She carried on with small talk about traffic and the weather, as if she could fill the room with noise before I noticed the silence underneath. After dinner, she said she needed to shower. I waited until the water started running before walking to her purse. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I just placed my hand on the leather and stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of everything settle, not as emotion, but as certainty. When she came back downstairs, her hair wrapped in a towel again, she looked at me in a way she hadn't in years. Nervous, unsure, like she finally sensed the ground shifting. "Ethan," she said softly, "you're being quiet again." "Am I?" I replied. She took a step closer, then another. "If something's wrong, you can tell me." I looked at her for a long, unbroken moment. "I know," I said, and I meant it, because the truth was finally forming around me, piece by piece. And soon enough, she would hear it too, in my words, in my actions, in whatever came next. But not tonight. Tonight was for silence. Tonight was for listening. Tonight was for letting her wonder what I knew, and how much more I was about to uncover. Michelle barely slept that night. I could feel her turning beside me, shifting, adjusting the blanket, sighing softly into the dark. The bed felt smaller than it ever had, as if the air between us had turned into something solid. I lay still, breathing evenly, letting her believe I was asleep. Sometimes silence reveals more than any argument ever could. Around 3 in the morning, she got up quietly and walked downstairs. I heard the faint murmur of her voice, too low for words, but not low enough to hide the urgency. A whisper meant for someone else. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I simply memorized the exact moment she chose to leave our bedroom to talk to another man. When she returned, her steps were slower, heavier, almost cautious, like she was afraid I might wake and ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. She slid back under the blanket and lay perfectly still, as if mimicking sleep could erase what she'd just done. By morning, she looked tired, eyes shadowed, smile thinner than before. "Rough night?" I asked casually as I poured coffee. She tensed almost imperceptibly. "Just couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." I nodded and handed her a mug. "I know the feeling." She froze for half a second. I pretended not to notice. She left for work earlier than usual, barely touching her breakfast, barely meeting my eyes. The moment her car left the driveway, I opened my notebook and read through everything I had written over the past days. Times, dates, lies layered on top of lies. Small details she hoped I wouldn't notice. She still thought I was the same man she could talk over, dismiss, distract with a smile. She didn't realize how much I had changed in the silence she created. I spent the morning gathering every piece of proof into a neat, methodical folder. I wasn't planning a dramatic confrontation. No shouting, no scenes. I wanted quiet clarity. I left the house around noon and drove to an attorney's office on the west side of town. I didn't go because I was ready to burn everything down. I went because I needed to know my options. I needed to move with intention, not emotion. The attorney, a calm man with silver hair and sharp eyes, listened as I slid the folder across the desk. He flipped through it slowly, occasionally raising a brow but never rushing. When he finished, he closed the file gently and looked at me with a steady, almost respectful expression. You've gathered more thorough documentation in 3 days than most people manage in a year, he said. If everything continues along this trajectory, you will be in a very strong position. I nodded. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, focused. What's your goal? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't know yet, not exactly. But I did know I wasn't going to let Michelle decide the ending of this story. Not after everything she'd already rewritten without my permission. That evening, I cooked dinner, her favorite dish, the one she always claimed only I could make right. When she walked through the door and smelled it, I saw something flicker in her expression. Guilt? Fear? Nostalgia? Maybe all of them. You cooked, she said, forcing a smile. Nice surprise. I thought we should talk, I replied calmly. She looked at me sharply, trying to gauge whether I knew anything, whether this was an ambush or a peace offering. We sat at the table, eating quietly. The silverware clinked. The clock ticked. The silence grew heavier by the second. Eventually, she cleared her throat. Ethan, if something's wrong, please just say it. Something is wrong, I said. Her hand trembled around her fork. What is it? I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small stack of printed receipts and notes on the table. Not the entire file, not everything I had gathered. Just enough to make her face drain of color. She stared at them without touching them. Her breathing grew shaky. Ethan, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I answered, my voice steady. But I'm not interested in explanations. Not tonight. Her eyes filled with tears. Not delicate, pretty ones. Heavy, panicked ones. Please, she whispered, don't do this. I never meant for, Michelle, I interrupted. Stop. She froze. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. For the first time in months, she wasn't performing. No fake smiles. No casual lies. No scripted excuses. Just the raw consequence of her choices staring back at her. I'm not yelling, I said. I'm not angry. I'm not even surprised anymore. I just see things clearly now. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Do you want to leave me? I looked at her for a long moment, long enough for her to shift in her seat. I want peace, I said, and I'll find it, with or without you. She broke then, burying her face in her hands, sobbing hard enough that her shoulders shook. But the tears didn't move me. Tears don't undo secrets whispered at 3 in the morning. Tears don't erase lies repeated daily. Tears don't rebuild trust already burned to ash. When she finally looked up, eyes red and swollen, she whispered, Tell me what you want me to do. I stood from the table slowly, calmly. For now, I said, I want you to think, really think, about everything you've been doing, everything you've been risking, everything you've been hiding. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I walked toward the hallway, stopping just before turning the corner. This isn't the end tonight, I said without looking back. But it might be coming sooner than you think. I left her sitting at the table surrounded by the first pieces of her own unraveling, the dinner growing cold between us. As I closed the door to my office behind me, a strange calm washed over me. Not victory, not relief. Something simpler, something cleaner. For the first time in a long, long while, the story felt like it finally belonged to me again. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment telling me what twist you saw coming or didn't.